Everybody in that valley figured the Vane ranch was already dead. They just hadn't gotten around to burying it. I know, because I was one of the men paid to keep the corpse warm, feeding 4 head of cattle on a spread that used to run 400, patching a roof over a man too stubborn to leave and too broke to fix it. And then a woman came up the mountain road in a truck that coughed worse than the old man did, and Sela's Vane looked her in the eye and gave her exactly 1 season to prove the place was worth saving. He thought he was giving her a chance to fail politely. What I'm going to tell you is what she did with it instead. The winter she didn't sleep, the calf she carried down a mountain in her own coat, the morning we found the note that changed everything, and the one decision she made that I still can't decide was mercy or ruin. I've buried a lot of things on that mountain. I never thought a legacy would be one of them. Stay with me. This one takes its time the way real things do. The rain started sideways before she even got out of the truck, and the first thing I ever heard Ruth Calloway say was a curse, quiet, tired, aimed at nobody, the kind you say when the last thing keeping you together comes loose. I was standing under the barn overhang with my collar up and my almanac shoved inside my shirt to keep it dry, because a man my age learns to protect the things that hold his memory better than his own hide. I write in the margins of that almanac, always have. Weather calvings, the day a good dog dies. My wife used to say I'd record my own funeral if I could hold the pencil after. She wasn't wrong. I watched the truck cough its last in the yard and I wrote in the margin next to the printed line about the March moon. She came in the rain. Bad sign or stubborn one. Can't tell yet. Turned out to be both. She was maybe 40, though the mountain would age that fast. Hair the color of wet straw pushed back off a face that had clearly decided a long time ago that crying was a luxury it couldn't afford. She had a canvas coat 2 sizes too big and a wedding ring on a chain around her neck instead of her finger, and I noticed that the way you notice a storm cloud on a clear day, filed it away for later, when it would matter. Silas came out onto the porch to meet her. That alone told me something. He hadn't walked past his own threshold in weeks, not since the hip gave out and the doctor in town used the word hospice like it was a place instead of a surrender. But there he was, upright on 2 canes, wearing the black hat he only put on for church and funerals and men he intended to intimidate. "You Calloway," he called through the rain. "I'm what's left of her," she called back. I liked her right then, and I hated that I did, because I'd watched 3 hired managers come up that road in 2 years and I'd watched all 3 of them leave, and every time a piece of Sela's left with them. He couldn't afford to lose another piece. He didn't have that many left. The Vane Ranch sat at 8,000 feet in a country that God made beautiful specifically, so it could get away with being cruel. Aspens on the north slopes, spruce black and close on the high ones, and a meadow system that in a good year could fatten cattle like nowhere else in the state. But the good years had gotten rare. The market fell. Then the well casing cracked. Then Silas's wife Marion died in the spring 3 years back and took the last of his fight into the ground with her. What was left was 4 cows, a bull too old to be worth his feed, a barn holding its breath, and me, Emmett Doss. 61 years on this earth and 40 of them on this mountain, hired hand to a family that used to matter. I want you to understand what Silas offered her, because everybody in town later told the story wrong. They said he gave her the ranch. He didn't. What he did was crueler and, I've come to think, kinder than that. He sat her down at the kitchen table that first night, the 2 of them across from each other with a kerosene lamp between them because the power'd been off since February, and he laid it out plain. "1 season," he said, "spring to first snow. I got money enough to keep it breathing that long and not a day more. You bring this place back into the black by first snow, it's yours, I'll sign it over and go die somewhere warm and you'll never see me again. You don't, and the bank takes it, and you'll have wasted 6 months of your life on a dead man's mountain." He leaned back. "That's the whole offer. There's no version where I go easy on you. I'm too old to be nice and too broke to be generous." She looked at him a long moment. I was at the stove pretending to tend a coffee pot that didn't need tending. "Why me?" she asked. "You don't know me from a fence post." "Because the other three came up here wanting to save me," Silas said. "You drove up here looking like you needed saving yourself. I'll take my chances with the drowning woman over the lifeguards. Lifeguards always figure they know the water." She didn't answer that, but I saw her hand come up and close around that ring on its chain just for a second, and then let it go. In my almanac that night I wrote, "He's not giving her the ranch. He's giving her a reason to keep breathing. Wonder if she knows the difference. Wonder if he does." I'll spare you the ledger of that first month, though God knows Ruth kept one and it near broke her. She found out fast what she'd walked into. The 4 cows were the least of it. The fencing on the upper allotment had gone to wire and prayer. The hay contract Silas had counted on had fallen through when the neighbor decided a dying man's handshake wasn't worth honoring. The truck she came in needed a transmission she couldn't buy. And the money Silas had, I saw the number, and I'll tell you it was the kind of number that makes a season feel like a trap dressed up as a chance. But here's the thing about Ruth that I started writing down, entry after entry, because I'd never seen it quite like that in a person. She didn't stop. Not she was brave, not she was strong. Those words are cheap, and I've heard men who never worked a day past noon use them about themselves. What Ruth had was worse and rarer. She simply did not seem to possess the part of a person that quits. She'd hit a wall and I'd think, this is it. This is the one that sends her back down the mountain, and she'd stand there and look at the wall for a while, and then she'd start taking it apart with her hands. The hay contract fell through. She drove 90 miles to a co-op she'd read about and traded 3 days of her own labor for enough feed to bridge the gap. The transmission was dead. She learned to nurse the clutch and taught herself, off a manual and a lot of cursing, to do a repair a mechanic would have charged $400 for. The well casing was cracked, that one she couldn't fix. So she rerouted the whole watering system to a spring up the North Draw, hauling pipe on her back through country that made my knees ache just watching. I asked her once, 3rd week in, why she didn't just leave. It was raining again. It rained the whole first month like the sky was testing her too, and she was soaked to the bone rethreading a gate hinge with fingers gone white and clumsy with cold. She didn't look up. "Because down the mountain there's nothing to fix," she said. "Up here there's everything. You have any idea how much easier it is to fix a fence than a life?" I wrote that one down word for word. Easier to fix a fence than a life. I've thought about it 1,000 times since. The thing about Silas was that he watched her the way a man watches a fire he's not sure he wants to catch. He'd sit on the porch in the afternoons, hip braced, and follow her across the yard with his eyes, and I couldn't tell if he was rooting for her or waiting for her to fail so he could stop hopping. Maybe both. Hope is a hard thing to carry when you're dying. Sometimes failure is a mercy because it lets you put the weight down. But something started shifting between them that I don't think either of them noticed at first. She started asking him things. Not to be kind, Ruth didn't have a lot of spare kindness that spring. She was rationing everything, but because he knew things. 40 years of that mountain lived in Silas's head, which draws held water in a dry year, which slopes turned deadly in a wet snow, where his father had buried a spring box back in '52 that still ran clean. And Silas, who'd spent 3 years refusing to be useful to anyone, started answering. I watched a dead man wake up over the course of a month, one question at a time. The evening it really turned, I remember, was in early May. A calf came early and wrong hindquarters first, in the dark, in a cold snap that had no business showing up that late. Ruth had never pulled a breech calf. Neither, honestly, had I in 20 years, and my hands don't do what they used to. And Silas couldn't get down off that porch to save his own life. So he did the only thing left. He stood at the fence in the freezing dark on his 2 canes and he talked her through it. Told her where to reach, how to find the hocks, when to pull, and when to wait for the cow. His voice came out of the dark steady and sure, a young man's voice hiding inside an old man's ruin, and Ruth knelt in the mud and the blood with her arms in past the elbow and did exactly what he said. The calf came out blue and still. I saw Ruth's face when it hit the straw not moving, and I'll never forget it, because for 1 second the whole thing, the ranch, the season, the ring on the chain, whatever she'd left down the mountain, all of it was in her eyes at once, and it was too much. And then Silas said, quiet from the fence, "Rub it, hard, like you're mad at it. It hasn't decided yet." She rubbed that calf like she was mad at it, like she was mad at everything, like it owed her. And it coughed and it lived. She sat back in the mud and she laughed. And then the laugh cracked open in the middle and she was crying. The kind of crying that isn't about the thing in front of you at all. And Silas Vane looked at her across that fence for a long time, and then said the truest thing I ever heard him say. "Yeah," he said, "it gets you like that. Loss and the opposite of loss. They come dressed the same. Takes you years to tell them apart, and by then you're old." That night I wrote a long entry, but the last line was the only one that mattered. He's not waiting for her to fail anymore. God help them both. Now they've got something to lose. Here's what I didn't know yet that spring. I didn't know about the ring on the chain, or the boy it belonged to, not her husband, though I'd assumed. I didn't know why a woman with hands that capable had shown up on a dying mountain with nothing but a bad truck and a refusal to stop. I didn't know that the reason she couldn't fix her life down below was that the part of it worth fixing was already in the ground, and had been for 11 months, and was 8 years old when it went. I didn't know that Ruth Calloway wasn't trying to build a ranch. She was trying to build something that would outlast her grief. Something that couldn't be taken by a market or a market crash or a phone call at 2 a.m. Something that, once it was standing, would go on being true whether she had the strength to stand next to it or not. I found all that out in the second half of that season, the hard half, the winter half, and I'll tell you the rest of it now. But I want you to sit for a second with the woman kneeling in the mud with a living calf and an old man's voice in the dark, because that was the last easy moment any of us got. After that, the mountain stopped testing her. It started coming for her in earnest. The first snow came in October, 6 weeks early, and it came like an argument the sky had been saving up. I need you to understand what that meant, because the whole deal hung on it. First snow was the deadline. Spring to first snow, that was the season Silas gave her. And if you'd asked me in September, I'd have told you she was going to make it. The math had turned. She'd bred the herd up from 4 head to 19 through trades and one terrifying gamble on a bank loan. She'd charmed out of a manager who I think just wanted to see a stubborn person win for once. She'd sold the summer's hay surplus. She'd fixed the well. The place was breathing on its own for the first time in 3 years. She needed maybe 3 more weeks to close the books in the black. 3 weeks. The snow gave her 4 days. It caught 200 head of somebody else's cattle on the high allotment too. A neighbor's herd Ruth had agreed to winter graze for a fee, the fee that was going to be the last piece of the black ink puzzle. When that storm rolled the temperature off a cliff, those cattle were up in the high draws where they'd drift into the timber and die by the dozen if nobody moved them down before it set in hard. 2 people can't move 200 head of cattle off a mountain in a blizzard. 2 young, whole, rested people can't do it. And what we had was a 61-year-old man with ruined knees, a woman running on grief and no sleep, and Silas Vane, who could no longer walk to his own mailbox. Ruth stood at the window watching the snow come down, and I watched her do the math I'd already done, and I watched her arrive at the same answer. There is no version of this where I win. Move the cattle and abandon the ranch chores, and the herd of 19 suffers. Save the 19 and the 200 die, and she owes the neighbor money she doesn't have, and the season ends in the red on the last week. She'd hit a wall, the biggest one yet. She stood and looked at it a long while, the way she did. And then she went and got her coat. "Ruth," I said, "you can't." "I know," she said, buttoning it. "That's not the same as won't. I'm not going to romanticize the next 3 days. There's a lie people tell about hard country, that suffering is beautiful, that struggle ennobles a person. It doesn't. Struggle just hurts, and then it's over, and you're either standing or you're not. What Ruth did over those 3 days was ugly and desperate, and I've never seen anything braver in my life. She rode into that storm on the one horse we had worth a damn, and she pushed cattle down draws in whiteout conditions where a wrong turn meant a 200-foot fall she couldn't have seen coming. She came back to the barn twice a day to break ice and feed the home herd, 40 minutes of frozen work, and then she turned around and went back up. She didn't sleep. I mean, she did not sleep. I sat up the second night, and I know, because I heard the door every few hours, the horse, the cold coming in. And Silas, this is the part that gets me. Silas ran the whole thing from the kitchen table like a general who'd lost his legs but not his war. He knew that mountain. He drew her maps by lamplight of where cattle would shelter, and where the drifts would trap them, and which draw had a fence gap she could push them through. He couldn't lift a finger to help, and he helped more than I did. I'd bring her coffee, and he'd bring her the mountain, 40 years of it, poured out onto the backs of feed store receipts in a shaking hand. On the third day she found the calf. It was one of the neighbors, a late one, separated from its mother and gone down in a drift, hypothermic, maybe an hour from dead. Any sensible rancher leaves it. One calf against 200 head and your own survival, you leave it, and God forgives you, because God knows the math too. Ruth took off her coat in a blizzard, wrapped that calf in it, and carried the thing down the mountain against her own chest. She could have died doing it. I want to be honest, she nearly did. She came through the barn door on the third night blue-lipped and shaking so hard she couldn't speak, holding a calf that lived because she'd given it the warmth she needed for herself, and she got maybe 10 feet inside and went down. Silas was there, on his canes at the barn, which he had no business being at, having crossed the yard in the storm the same way she'd crossed the mountain, because it was the only thing left he could do. He got down onto the floor beside her, an old man folding himself down onto cold concrete he'd never get up from without help, and he held her while she came back from wherever the cold had taken her. I heard what he said to her. I wrote it down after, and I got it right. "You already won," he told her over and over into her frozen hair. "Whatever the books say, you hear me. The books don't know what you are, I know what you are. You already won." She made it. Both herds made it, lost 11 of the 200, which in that storm was close to a miracle, and lost none of her own. And when the snow finally settled and the sun came out over a world gone silent and white, Ruth Calloway had done the impossible thing. But she'd done it 4 days after first snow. She'd missed the deadline. By the letter of the deal Silas had laid out on that first rainy night, she'd lost. The season ended at first snow, and the books hadn't closed black until the storm was already on the ground. She'd saved everything and technically won nothing. I watched her realize it, sitting at the kitchen table with the neighbor's payment finally in hand, and I watched something go out of her face. Not the fight, she never lost that, but the hope, which is different, which is the thing that lets the fight feel like it's for something. And that's when Silas slid the papers across the table. He'd had them drawn up in September. Deed, transfer, the whole thing, signed and notarized and dated a month before the storm ever came. He'd made his decision back when she pulled that first breech calf out of the dark and rubbed it back to life. The deadline was never the real deal. The deadline was just the wall he'd needed to see if she was the kind of person who'd climb it. "It was yours before the snow," he said. "It's been yours since May. I just needed to watch you not know that. I needed to see what you'd do when you thought you were losing." He looked at her, and his voice went to that place old men's voices go when they've stopped being afraid of anything. "You'd have carried that calf down the mountain either way. That's how I knew. A person who'll do it when the deal's already lost, that's the only kind of person worth handing a mountain to." Silas Vane died the following March, almost exactly a year after Ruth first came up the road in the rain. He went in his sleep, in the house he was born in, on the ranch he'd been sure would die with him, and it didn't die with him, and I believe that's the only reason he let himself go. Ruth buried him next to Marion on the south slope, where the aspens turned first in the fall. She kept the ranch, built it over the years into something the whole valley came to talk about. Not big. She never wanted big, but solid, the kind of operation that outlasts markets and men. She hired young people nobody else would hire, people who showed up looking like they needed saving, and she gave them all one season and a wall to climb, same as she'd been given. Some made it and some didn't. She grieved the ones who didn't, and she never stopped offering the chance. She told me once, years on, why. We were on the porch and the aspens were turning, and she had that ring on its chain still, the boy's ring, worn smooth by then from a decade of her hand closing around it. Sila's gave me a place to put it, she said. The love that didn't have anywhere to go anymore. That's what a legacy is, Emmett. It's not what you build. It's where you finally get to set down the thing you've been carrying. I wrote that in the almanac, last real entry of any weight I ever made in it. I'm the one telling you this because Ruth's gone now too, and somebody has to. She left me the almanac in the end, which is a funny thing to leave a man his own book back. But I understood it. She wanted the record kept. She wanted somebody to remember that a drowning woman came up a dying mountain and refused to stop, and an old man watched her do it and decided to live a little longer just to see how it turned out. There's one more entry after hers, in a hand that isn't mine. I've never been able to read the last line.